Okay, we are live. Great then. So, hi, hello, namaste, vanakkam, good morning, good evening to whichever part of the world you're joining from. My name is Modit. I'm your host for Skillspace.ai Hiring Diaries. As you might know, Skillspace.ai is a technical assessments platform built by DeFi. We're a community of data scientists from around 140 plus countries. Skillspace.ai is a technical assessment platform that companies use to hire top data scientists and engineers. And the way we do it is basically we present everything in a very simple manner that help enables companies to identify people through on the job skills. Now, on today's date, we are hosting this hiring that is even because it's something that we started off with an intention to invite the top leaders from around the globe who will come and educate people in our community. So, and these are people that who believe in our vision. So this time we were very fortunate enough to have someone like Bob on board with us. So Bob Friday is our guest speaker for the day. Bob is someone who is pretty much a very successful serial entrepreneur. His first company made an IPO, decades ago, if that's correct. And then the second startup was acquired by Cisco for around 450 million, if I'm remembering the number correctly, back in 2005. We're talking about more than 15 years ago. After that, he started off Mist AI, which is now a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader, which is a pretty big achievement in itself. All of these startups have been into deep tech and has something to do with wireless network technologies. The last one, Mist AI, revolves around self-learning wireless technologies, as I recall it correctly. Bob is also the VP and CTO of Juniper at this point in time, and obviously he's the co-founder of Mist. So, welcome to the show, Bob. Very glad to have you here.
Yeah, no, glad to be here, Madit. And, as I told you, this is a topic dear to my heart, so always easy to talk about.
Awesome. I'm very glad that you're so passionate about sharing your learnings with the community. So probably we'll get started where I'll probably give some context around the agenda that we have for the day. So it's around understanding the how we typically build teams that make it really big. And just to give you some context, last decade, I mean towards the end of the last decade, um, Harvard Business Review made a prediction that companies will be spending something around $13 trillion on just artificial intelligence and machine learning, and approximately 56% of organizations are using AI already in some or the other function, is what McKinsey published very recently. Now, if you're looking at these stats, this is something which is very fascinating because at the same time, Gartner made a number, published a number which said that 87% of investments made into data science go down the drain. So there's a lot of gap here, which is why we thought, okay, yes, we should probably have someone who's the best in this industry to address and talk on this. The Great Resignation, as we know it, is something where people are talking about the problem in hiring top-notch data scientists and engineering talent. And the problem is, it's not about just lack of understanding around hiring practices. It's also about a lot of lack of awareness around data practices and much more. So, in this session, we'll be discussing about the best approach to entrepreneurship, to starting up businesses in AI, and then building great teams that make it big, something as big as Gartner Magic Quadrant leader. So this is where we are today. So I'll start off with the first question. These questions are the ones that we received from the registrants who emailed us saying that this is what I should be asking to Bob during the session. However, let me also say that we have a team working in the back end who will be curating the questions for us. So if you have any question that you want to pick up, that you want to ask to Bob, that you want to ask to Bob, please feel free to put that across. Our team will pick it for sure. So I'll pick up with the first question, which is pretty obvious. You've had a pretty long and extensive experience in the industry, and in your in the journey of doing an IPO and then having two big company acquisitions, one by Cisco, one by Juniper. Uh, I mean, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, how has raising money changed over the last 20 years or so?
That's kind of interesting because 20 years ago when I started aerospace, I was still a young, relatively young kid, and back then, when you looked at VCs 20 years ago, it was really around team, market fit, and product fit, right? And we were out raising money on PowerPoint, right? We didn't have product or anything. We basically were out there trying to basically convince someone to invest in, back then it was aerospace, right? And it was during the transition of, controllers in the enterprise space. And we basically raised money on PowerPoint, and it was team. And VCs are making a decision on, team, product fit, market fit. And I would say the same thing was true at Mist. When I left Cisco to raise money, we were raising money on a product fit, market fit, and team theory and PowerPoint. What I've seen lately in this market space is really a lot of VCs. There's a lot of money out there right now. There's a lot more angel money, and I would say a lot more VCs are now, investors are looking for helping companies scale. They're kind of expecting the angel investors to actually help get you to a point where you have a software product, to a point where you have a software product and some traction with a couple of customers, and they're really looking to help you scale. So I think that's what I've seen changed in the investor community. They're looking for those kind of software unicorns, that are easy to scale and have, create a lot of value quickly.
Okay. That's a fair perspective. And do you think this was the same scenario across the globe even 20 years ago? Because I think you started your first startup in the Bay Area, which is known as the one of the best places to start up. So do you think that is something that existed even 20 years ago, or it's something which was already there in that area, but now it is expanding globally? I mean, what do you think?
I think it really started with kind of the cloud. I think
Okay.
if you look at even Mist right now, one of the big things when we started Mist was really around leveraging this cloud, the value of the cloud. And when you look at what can you do with the big value of the cloud is really, it's just a much better way of developing and maintaining software, right? 20 years ago when I did aerospace, we were basically developing software and shipping it on boxes and embedded devices, right? And that cycle was relatively long, right? The time it took us to develop the software, regression test and everything. When we got to the cloud era, things are happening so much faster and more reliably, right? We're building on top of open source. We have tons of open source now on which to build companies. And basically we're doing code releases every week, every day now, right? So the whole speed of innovation is like changed dramatically over the last couple of years. So I think that's one part of the investment community, right? The time to value is not as long as it used to be, right? And things change much more quicker nowadays.
Okay. And in your perspective, do you think this is something that is there to stay, or it's more of because the market is bullish, or what do you think from an investor's perspective?
I think from an investor they expect to get there quicker. If you're out raising money right now and you're showing a revenue growth of 2x the first year, that may be relatively small right now, because when you're in a SaaS cloud domain, they're starting to see this, when you scale or you hit the gas, they want to see that, you want to see that hockey stick, right?
Yeah, right.
Because if you're in a SaaS cloud world, it should be relatively easy, faster growth. If you got the right formula, it's easy to acquire users very quickly in this new world.
Yep. On the note of acquiring users, I'm very much curious to ask this, because it's something that Mist AI definitely did. But in the interest of our audience, we'd love to understand what is Mist AI, and what was the theory that you started? I mean, what was the vision and where you are right now?
Yeah, this is the area I tell you, if I look at my first adventure like aerospace, that's what I call an emerging market, right? 20 years ago when I was doing Wi-Fi wireless, it's hard to believe, right? Wi-Fi is, 20 years ago, Wi-Fi still was not a guaranteed thing, right? It was still nice to have. People were still like, why do I need it? So that was what I call an emerging market. When we did Mist, I was at Cisco. Wi-Fi wireless was already kind of a $7 billion market. So it was a very mature market. So the theory behind Mist was really around an architectural change. So the theory was, we are really seeing in networking this architectural change between cloud and AI. So that was kind of the thesis, what I call product fit and market fit. And really, when I would tell people when they start companies, you have to kind of really think about the product market fit. The question, is it true, right? Because in the case of Mist, if that was not true, then Mist would never succeeded, right? If there really was not an architectural change between cloud and AI in networking, and it was really just a feature, then the likes of Cisco and HP Aruba would have killed us, right? Because you really can't have a sustain in a mature market. You have to have something that is really disrupting them. So that was kind of the theory behind leaving Cisco, that there was this really opportunity, and I kind of saw it because I was inside Cisco, right? I could actually see the opportunity. We had just acquired Meraki, and Meraki had done this, make networking simpler, leveraging the cloud. So I could see the truth of that, this cloud technology was really going to change, how you maintain and develop and operate software. And then if you remember back in 2014, people ask, when did AI really start to become more real? If you kind of look at Google stats, you'll see that 2014 is when all of a sudden the AI ML searches really happened at Google. So somewhere around 2014, we hit that critical inflection point, where AI started, or ML started to become more real because of compute storage. We had enough compute storage where, as I tell people, I wasn't limited by compute storage, right? If I'm solving a problem, 20 years ago, the funny thing is, the problems I solved at Mist were the same problems I was trying to solve at Airspace. The only difference is, I could get the compute storage to solve it. Back then, I was limited by these little 1U pizza boxes, right? Whatever. That was kind of my compute storage. When we got to the Amazon, Google, Microsoft era, you're only limited by your Amazon bill, right? As long as you have money, you can keep paying for more compute storage.
Yep.
So that was kind of the beginnings of Mist. Was there was really an architectural change, really around cloud AI, and that's when I decided, hey, and those are typically what I call blank sheet of paper opportunities. The question is, well, why not just stay at Cisco and do that inside Cisco? And what you find, when there's an architectural change, those are really hard things to do inside big companies. For people who've been in big companies, how hard it is, right, to get a big company to actually pull together, start something new inside of a big company.
Yep. And I mean, what I get from your answer is also this, that you had this passion of solving this particular problem. It's just that when you saw the ecosystem developing as per your vision, you just hopped onto it and made it big. On these lines, Orpheus is asking one question that I want to pick up very quickly. So they ask, what does Mist do differently in the market that made it, my Magic Quadrant leader?
So if you look like, so like I said, at Cisco, I was the mobility CTO at Cisco, and we really had just got done acquiring Meraki. So I was very familiar with what Meraki was up to. And you look back then, when we acquired Meraki, they were actually building their own data centers because AWS didn't exist, right? So they were not really leveraging all the power of AWS and the scale of AWS. So that was one thing that was different, right? When we started Mist, we started on top of the whole AWS, Google compute storage infrastructure. The other thing that was different about Mist is, AI was really not really relevant. ML was not really relevant about 2014, right? And that's when ML started to become, more easy to actually leverage and everything. So I would say those were probably the two big differentiations around what the other competitors were doing, right? If you look at Cisco, Juniper, the other networking competitors, that was the big inflection. Those were the two big inflection points that made Mist different from the other big companies out there. And as I said before, the real big difference is it's hard for big companies to adapt to when there's an architectural change. The same thing happened with my first company, Airspace, right? We were moving from autonomous access points to controller architectures. So that was another architectural change, and it was hard for Cisco and HP to adapt to those changes. That's where there's an opportunity for startups, right? When you see those architectural changes inside of a vertical or some market space.
Okay. I want to ask this because what Mist is doing is fundamentally based on top of what the developments in the field of artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and all. Okay, is AI overhyped? Because there's a lot of marketing material which is out there around AI. In fact, I do hear some investors saying that, jokingly, that there was a time in the Indian ecosystem where AI was just used as a way to, get tagged as a deep tech startup. So, based on your understanding, what do you think is the difference between what's on the ground reality and what's around us in PR and everything?
Yeah. And so I think it's true, right? I think a lot of problem with AI right now is there is so much noise out there. It's hard for the average person to kind of sort through the noise and find out what's real. Now, what's real right now, and this is what I usually tell people, is AI is really kind of the if you're doing AI, you're really trying to build something to do something on par with a human thing, right? Either you're trying to build something to drive a car, or you're trying to build something that can diagnose cancer on par with a doctor. At Mist, our vision was really, we were trying to build something that really can troubleshoot and manage networks on par with IT domain experts, right? And so that's, and if you think about AI, it's really just the ultimate automation of something, right? Because we're trying to basically do something on par with a human. Now, having said that, to do that, the ML, all the fancy math that makes this happen, that is what's underneath the hood, right? And it doesn't really, some of this stuff building AI is not all fancy math. That's what I tell people, right? Some of it, there is deep learning, like that diagnosing cancer, right? That really is happening because of convolutional neural networks, right? I mean, we really got to the point doing image recognition. That is making a big difference. And that was a quantum leap in image recognition, right? Is when we finally got to enough compute storage where we can do convolutional networking. That radically changed, this autonomous car and diagnosing, right? And the same in networking, right? That is where deep learning is really making a difference in different industries.
Okay. And I mean, you talked about CNNs, you talked about deep learning. I'll ask a relatively.
But I'll tell you this, but the difference between marketing and this is where data scientists, at the end of the day, there has to be some real data science. You'll find all the marketing looks very similar. But if you look under the hood, the question is, are you really going to find real data scientists under the hood? When you look behind the screen, is there really, is there a there?
Yeah. On that line, I would want to ask questions around, getting those data science that you're talking about or building the stuff under the hood. But I want to ask this question, which is at a way more rudimentary level. I mean, okay, what do you think is the difference between, artificial intelligence and machine learning? Because a lot of people use this very commonly. And in fact, at times I would have been doing that too, but I want to know your perspective on it.
And that's what I'm saying. When someone says AI to me, they're saying they're trying to do something on par with a human. It's more of a concept than an algorithm, right? And so usually when someone says, and what I found is usually when someone uses the term AI, and I'll ask them, say, well, what task are you trying to do on par with a human? And they don't know, right? If they can't answer that question, then it's probably they don't know what they're talking about. ML is really just math, right? ML is mutual information, decision tree, LSTM. ML refers to all the math that makes AI real, right? So those are usually, that's how I differentiate. AI is a concept of doing something on par with the human. ML is all the math that helps make it happen.
Okay. That's an interesting way of putting it across. Okay. I mean, you talked about building people having teams, there's someone who's making this ML in the entire piece of the puzzle, which we call as AI, which is making machines work in parallel to humans, as you called. So on these lines, I want to ask questions around hiring data scientists, because it's one of the biggest pain points if you look in the industry at this point in time. We see thousands of companies posting openings on LinkedIn on data science roles on a daily basis. But if you look at the number of positions that they fill, is very difficult. And in fact, if I'm looking at startups, the problem at their level is something different than what at an enterprise. Now, I want to understand from you, based on your perspective of the industry, how do you think hiring data scientists has changed from from the time you started Mist to what it is today? How do you think that has changed over the years?
I think so when I started Mist in 2014, in the first data science I really ever hired was a particle physicist. And I would say since 2014 to 2020, hiring data scientists has become harder and more expensive. And I would say in a startup, it's even harder, and I think there's two models for hiring data scientists. One, if I'm in a startup, you have to be a data scientist and you have to also be a good software engineer. Because what I found in, working with data scientists is they don't have the domain expertise, right? You're trying to hire someone who actually understands very complicated statistics and math, and also can write software. And that's usually a very rare combination. And big companies, they kind of get away with hiring PhD data scientists that really don't know how to do production software. They may know the math and the models, but they really can't write software that you can actually deploy in production. When you're in a startup, you have to find people who can do both, right? I don't have the luxury of having pure PhD data scientists who don't know how to write code.
Right.
And I would say, my first experience was hiring a particle physicist because they tend to understand all the math. If you look at physicists, and I would say that was kind of what I look at hiring between the cracks. You look for people who actually understand the math. It's easier to find someone who understands the math and teach them how to write software than try to find someone who writes software and teach them how to, teach them the theory of the math. So that's kind of how I got started in, trying to find my first couple of data scientists to help me lay the foundation at Mist.
Okay. And is that a recommendation that you will give to anyone who's starting up an AI startup on today's date? I mean, because it's something that we come across on a regular basis. They want to hire the first one or two data scientists, and they're worried about it for a few months. So, yeah, what's your recommendation on that?
Yeah. My recommendation, nowadays, right? If I'm starting a new company, I'm competing with, we're competing with Google and Facebook. Where these, someone has to choose between, do you want to start a startup adventure? These data scientists, they can go to Google, Facebook, Apple, and they can get very big W-2s. Trying to convince someone that they should join a startup versus going to Google is kind of hard, right? Especially if someone's just out of school. It's easy to go to big W-2. So usually I look for people who want to actually learn, and I go to a lot of colleges and, do similar speeches. Like, if you're coming out of school, do you want to go down the startup path or the big company W-2 path? And usually I tell people that, hey, if you can survive in a startup environment, and not everyone can, right? Because usually startup environments are very chaotic. And if you're not a self-starter, you can usually get you have to be able to jump in, I call it deep into the swimming pool and get self-started. But you will learn more in a startup environment than a big company environment if you can survive. So I typically look for people who want or are more interested in learning than they are in big W-2s.
Okay. But at times, what I have seen is, when somebody is, just starting up, and it's a common problem that I have seen is they typically tend to look for someone with some experience in the industry. Is that because you mentioned about talking to university grads or someone who's already in the university and understanding their perspective around working with early stage companies? Uh, what's your take on this? Do you think somebody should go and just start off with university grads who are absolutely brilliant and are willing to work with you, or you are of this opinion that you should have someone with a lot of experience who can mentor these people?
Experience is good, but I prefer to have high IQ. So usually, I prefer to find someone, who actually understands the math, right? That they understand the theory behind all these algorithms to some extent, that knows how to write software. And 3, they're actually passionate about producing a product, because usually, I found, when you're working with data scientists, there's certain data scientists who are more into the research. They're not interested in actually making a product work. They're more interested in about the theory behind something, which is fine. But when you're in a startup or a company, right, we're actually in the business of producing products. And so usually what I found is data scientist people, I find PhDs who've been doing research for a couple of years, and they're finally tired of writing papers, right? They've been writing papers for, 3, 4, 5 years, and they finally decide they really want to see if they can build a product. So that tends to be one pattern I've seen in hiring data scientists. They've done a lot of research, but now they want to try to actually see if they can build a product.
Okay. That's an interesting insight. But I want to ask this: like, let's say I'm an enterprise on today's day. Just a random question. I'm an enterprise and I want to build a data science team at my organization, which is happening in a lot of companies if you look around, especially startups, the ones who are becoming unicorns and are scaling up. They have the PMF, they have the funding, they have the growth, and now they want to, start working on data science too. This is the time for them. Now, now they have basically the luxury to go and spend money, but find the best talent. Now, would you give the same recommendation to them that they should go to a university grad probably and try to hire them, or you think the approach would be different in case of somebody who's an enterprise and is looking to hire the first data science lead or something?
Well, I mean, I think, if you're on a limited budget, it's, experienced data scientists are expensive. If someone is an experienced data scientist, I think, we're talking, their total comp can be up close to $500,000, right? If they've got years of experience and they actually have a track record of proving it. So you tend to be, if you can afford it, you should hire them, right? And that's why Google and Facebook hire them, right? They've got known track records. So usually if you're starting from scratch, you're usually looking for younger data scientists who are on their way up. And usually, the other thing I tell people, right, anyone, I can take anyone and turn them, if they know how deep to write code, you can take anyone who knows a little bit of Python, and in 3 days, you could turn them into a data science. Over the weekend, anyone on this call right now who's never actually trained a model, in 3 days, we could have them up and running and basically, classifying the alphabet, right? That first exercise. That by itself is relatively easy for the average person to figure out how to do. The trick behind data scientists in product space is really around feature engineering, right? And that's what people don't realize. Most of the work is not the model. There's a lot of people who know how to get a model up and running and trained. It's a lot more different when you're actually dealing with a real domain. You have to get the data scientists to spend time on the feature engineering, understand the problem they're working with. They also have to spend a lot of time with domain experts, right? Whether it's networking, finance, healthcare, whatever. Usually most data scientists are not familiar with what domain they're working in, right? You're bringing someone into a domain that they have to spend some time with the domain expert to really understand the problem they're working on.
Okay. Thanks for that elaborate answer. This is something that Alan had also asked. Can you share some insights about where you were able to find your first AI engineer superstars at Mist? So I think this is something that you kind of answered. One thing that I want to pick up that is asked by Diane. You talked about data scientists knowing how to build ML models and software engineers knowing how to build softwares. There's usually a gap in this particular process where a lot of things end up, not working out. And that has some, and because I asked question around MLOps, which is why I want to, I'll pick this up because we're talking about it recently. So he asked, MLOps has become very prominent lately, and not the same few years ago. How was it managed when Mist had started? How did you go about it?
Well,
And
this is a great question, because I would say, over the last year or two, MLOps is starting to become more important at Mist as we get bigger in scale. I would say in the beginning days, MLOps was not that relevant because the number of models we were dealing with was relatively small when you get started. So you can kind of deal with them. The data scientists can kind of hand it manually. You're basically training these models. You've got Airflow and different scripts trying to basically train them once a day or once a week, whatever the training schedule is. Once you get up to tens of models, that's where you have to keep an eye, because what we got to a point at Mist, right? We started on one single cloud instance like AWS West. Right now we've got 8 different scopes, and what you'll find is the data across these scopes can change, right? The model in Europe may be slightly different than the model in the US, right? Just because the data, the statistics around the input data change. Now that data can change over time. That is where MLOps becomes more important, where, you need to start to have frameworks in place like MLflow, that you can start keeping track of statistics, right? The training data. If you start seeing the training data change over time, that's where you have to start realizing, it's time to retrain a model. So there is a point in your career. I think when you first start, I don't think MLOps is when you first starting in the first couple of years, it's probably not that important. But as you start to scale, that's where MLOps starts to become much more important on, when you get the tens of models that you're trying to maintain and keep an eye on.
Okay. And for the interest of the audience, because a lot of people may not understand MLOps. So, I mean, as someone from, someone in the industry, a leader in the industry, how would you describe AI ops in a very simple manner for the audience? I mean, if you
Well,
could, explain. Yeah.
now AI ops is slightly different than ML ops.
Okay. Yeah.
AI ops refers to networking and using AI for operating systems. ML ops is really around how to maintain models, ML models at scale, right? So ML ops usually
Okay.
refers to things like ML flow, right? Where how am I going to I've got to train models. Yeah, I've got all these different models. When do I know when I have to retrain it? What happens when all of a sudden the training data has one set of characteristics, and all of a sudden the input, the data that's coming in real time, is actually different than the training data, right? So I've trained this model on a set of data. I'm running this model in production, and the data that I'm actually dealing with in production, it starts to become different than the data I use to train it with, right? That is where ML ops. Usually, when people refer to ML ops, it's like, how do you maintain and train models at scale over time that people are dealing with right now? And, that's what we're dealing with at MIST, right? I mean, when we started, we had one or two models. Now we have tens of models that we have to maintain.
Okay, okay. And I mean, this is something that, by the way, even as I did it very in this call itself, that I had made the mistake of using AI ops and ML ops interchangeably at times, to be very frank. But I want to understand from a hiring perspective. I mean, how do you go about finding people around these skills? Because at times, I mean, while it is very much gaining prominence, it's something which is still not at the stage where it should be. So
Yeah.
how do you go about hiring someone in AIOps or MLOps, both of them?
Yeah, well, I think I think we discussed so, I mean, so we're hiring we're hiring data scientists here in the U.S. and also in India, and I would say hiring in U.S. and India are slightly different. Um, in U.S. it's more about you're very competitive in the U.S. trying to hire a data scientist. What I found in India, it's a lot harder. A lot more people in India call themselves a data scientist. And there's a little bit difference between the PhD data scientist, the person who knows how to write they know their way around the models and can train them, and then there's data engineering too, right? And that's the other critical part of how do you, if you're building one of these models, a lot of the work, like I said before, goes into building the pipelines, which is not typically a data scientist activity, right? There's a lot of, whether it's Flink, Storm, there's all these different pipelines that have to be built before we even get to the model, before we even get to the model. So like we're doing FIDA Tech, I found it's really good to have some way of actually screening data scientists, right? Some way to actually filter through all the different noise and get to the point where, is this person a PhD data scientist who understands all the theory and math behind it? Is this a software engineer who's taught themselves some basic ML algorithms? Or is this really a data engineer person who understands all the pipelines, and how to get all the infrastructure and plumbing built for models? So that's what, what you're doing at Skillspace, really helps kind of sort that out, and I found that's critical, for, when you're over here in the US trying to sort this out in India.
Okay, okay. By the way, thanks a ton for the kind appreciation of our work. Matters a lot to us. I want to pick this question. This is slightly different. I mean, I don't know. I mean, how you'd answer it, but I want to pick it because it has come several times. Suraj first asked this, and then someone from No Hive has asked this. I'll pick this one. How do you validate your AI-based startup idea? It depends from context to context, but what would you answer to this?
Well, and I would say there's probably two parts to this question. One is startup, and that's more about what I call product fit, market fit. So usually, like, when someone comes to me, they're trying to start something, and they want me. They're asking me whether or not I will fund it or not.
Yep.
One is the market fit. What are you doing in the market? Why do you think there's an opportunity? Mist, it was around architectural change, right? Mature market, and we think there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to disrupt. The other one is around product fit. It's like, what are you doing that is differentiated? And usually when I talk to people who are trying to do some sort of startup and they're claiming they're doing some AI, I asked, like I said before, I asked two questions. I was like, well, what human behavior are you trying to emulate? If you're claiming to do AI, what human task are you trying to basically build, do on par with? And then the next thing I usually get down into is like, describe to me what algorithm you're using, what, and usually it's not one algorithm. Like I said, when you're building something on par with a human, it's typically not one algorithm. There's usually a couple different algorithms, right? If you're building an autonomous car, there's not one magical algorithm that's driving that car, right? There's a whole bunch of different little algorithms in that car to get that car to do autonomous driving. Image recognition is a little bit different. You could build a whole startup on image recognition, right? If you got really good at convolutional and, recognize, but even there, if you're looking at MRIs and trying to do that, it's not usually one algorithm, it's a couple algorithms. So that's usually when people come to me with AI startup concepts is, break it down into market fit, and then product fit, what human task are you trying to really automate? And then I start digging into actually what algorithms, what math are you actually leveraging here?
Okay. This is an interesting answer, to be very honest. I mean, I never looked at it from this perspective. Thanks for putting it across. One thing that I want to pick up, and it's something that Kashyap has mentioned, and he has been actively participating in the discussions. It's something very much on the technical side. But any suggestions for ML pipeline like Kubeflow or something? I mean, train data, unattended runs. I mean, this is something like, I mean, is it from hiring standpoint or not? I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, yep.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. This question is kind of along the scaling tools question, right? And I deal with this on a regular basis of if you're going to get into the cloud business, and this is almost a cloud question, right? Is before you even get to the AI portion of anything, first of all, you have to master cloud technologies. If you look at the under the hood at Mist, right, there's probably 40 different open source pieces of code that we have to deploy and operate every week, right? Whether it's Kubeflow or MLflow. I mean, these are all the underlying tools that it takes to actually keep a cloud SaaS company running. So beyond just the data science portion, you've got to build this cloud infrastructure team, right? You've got to have a team of people, of SRE, DevOps that can deploy and operate this thing every week. And yes, these pipelines, in Kubeflow and MLflow are basically tools for helping scale ML models, help deploy and operate and maintain models. But there's other pipelines, if you're doing real time, right? You got to get, Flink, Storm, if you're going to process data in real time, you're doing Spark, everyone uses Spark, right? You guys, if we're doing anything in batch, you guys, Spark streaming, Spark, you have to go through all these different pipelines that got to be up and running before you actually get started. So I think to answer that question, I would put that into what I call the foundational cloud, right? If you look at Mist, right, it was a year or two, we didn't even do AI. We spent the first year just building a cloud foundation, because the first effort was really to get data into the cloud. Before you do anything with AI ML, you have to have the data. You have to have the data. Whatever problem you're solving, you got to get that data to the cloud in some form that you can actually start to do some, do the fun AI ML stuff with.
Thanks for simplifying that, Bob. I want to pick this question, which is around. I mean, this is something which is. I mean, at times I struggle. I see a lot of people. We talked about hiring the first few data scientists. I mean, I'm circling back to the hiring spectrum. How does, I mean, this is very specific. I mean, if we're looking at someone which is an enterprise, which has a which has an established data science team, someone like Mist AI, you have a good thriving team of data scientists on today's date. What are some of the top things that you look for while hiring at your company if you're looking at the data science team?
Yeah. I mean, in particular at Mist right now, I mean, we're very, I would say, uh, like I said before, we're very interested in hiring people who understand the math, but
Hmm.
that can
Hmm.
also write production quality software.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So at Mist right now, it's kind of what I call full stack end-to-end data scientists. These are people who actually know how to work with customers, because it starts with the problem, right? You have to actually understand the problem you're working on, because ultimately at the end of it, when you get this model deployed and everything, you have to go back to the customer and say, did this actually do anything? Is this actually solving the problem? If I'm in networking right now and I'm trying to detect some anomalous behavior in the network, and I write some sort of LSTM model, I've actually got to make sure, did that really make a difference to the customer? So right now we find, what we find was really hard is it's easy to find people who understand kind of the models and the data science. It's harder to find people who actually can roll up their sleeves, write production software, deal with product managers and customers, work with the domain experts, right, in customer support, get their model in production, and then go back and actually verify that the model actually did something useful. That's what I call the full rounded data scientist. That's a little bit harder to find than the person who's actually knows how to, they've done a Jupyter notebook, and they know how to train a model, right? You give them a data set, model trained.
Hmm, 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 hmm. Okay, okay. That's an interesting answer. And so you typically look at people with both I mean, an amalgamation of software development and data science skills is probably how.
Well, I would tell you this. It's actually, if you talk to, my Justin's my data science lead, he looks more for attitude than,
Okay, okay.
if you find someone with a relatively high IQ, the aptitude to actually solve problems, at the right attitude,
Yeah.
um, you usually can work with them and get them up to speed. If they don't know how to write software, you usually can get up to speed. Okay, let's get your software skills up. Um,
Yeah.
so I would say attitude is probably you know, the number one first order bit on
Parameter.
hiring someone. Right? If you hire a pre-dom with someone with a big ego, you can't really fix that, right? It's like that just doesn't get fixed. So I think it starts with
Mhm.
attitude. You have to have aptitude and skill, but attitude is probably the first order bit of, when you're trying to have someone join a team. Because when you look at data science teams, I think data scientists like to work together. When you work with data scientists, they enjoy working together and solving problems, right? They're exploring different algorithms or different ways of solving problems. Um, so I think data scientists, one of those is, they do better together in groups than usually alone.
Okay, okay. Thanks for answering that. I think a lot of people in the community are data scientists, or they would want to join your team at Mist or Juniper, or probably they are talent leaders who would want to understand which parameters to look for. I want to ask this question. I mean, this is something that a lot of people want to understand from this session. I mean, Mist actually became a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader in just 6 years, and that's a massive achievement for someone who is just. I mean, if today we're talking about an Indian startup who has done it, I mean, despite the thriving ecosystem that we have here, there's no one who has done that to date. So how did Mist go from absolutely like a blank sheet of paper, as you call it, to a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader?
Yeah. So this one here, one's dear to my heart because, to be, Miss started, as you see this whiteboard behind me,
Yeah.
this is where Miss started with, two of us and a blank sheet of paper thinking that, let's go jump off the cliff and let's go start this little company. And we had a theory around cloud and AI. The fact that we got to the Gartner leader in this wired MQ in 6 years, that is actually, for those who know who Gartner is, that is just a ultimate, going from where we're at to leader in 6 years is amazing. And what I tell people, it really starts with the product fit and market fit. If you're doing a startup, you know, You find most startups, they have to pivot. They have some theory or something. And usually if you find yourself pivoting during the venture, right, that your theory is not quite right, everything, that usually leads to dilution, right? I have to raise more money and everything. At Miss, the product fit, market fit was actually correct from the beginning, and we executed. And I think that's the
Okay.
other big thing. When you start these adventures, even if your vision is correct, ultimately you got to execute, which gets back to, you got to have real engineering muscle. You got to have real data scientists. You have to have real engineers who can actually execute on the vision. It's not good. It's not good enough just to have a vision. You may be right. You actually have to have a team of people. And that, at Miss, I'm kind of famous for, you guys. This startup stuff is what I call the ultimate team sport, right?
Okay.
You don't get to the you don't get to the Gartner MQ with a single individual. It's ultimately watching a team of people execute. And it works from marketing, sales, engineering. You've got to get all the teams to actually execute on all cylinders. It's like, your cricket, football, it's like watching a sports team, right? When you see a sports team, execute at the highest level, it's usually because they have a great team executing across all positions.
Yep. Okay. Ultimate teams. I mean, a sport team. That's an interesting way of putting it across. Yeah.
And
Interesting.
it's magical when you see it execute, right? It's like, hey, this is, you have rock stars in all the positions executing.
Yeah, yeah,
Including.
and when you relate to sport, it also implies that there are people who are doing different roles and doing it well. I mean, I think as you mentioned, it's about getting sales right, marketing right, data science right, engineering right. That's very interesting way of putting it across. I just want to quickly ask this because you've been talking about having a product fit, market fit at a very early stage. How early are we talking about in the case of Mist? Then did you hit your PMF?
Well, that's what I'm saying. When we left, when I jumped off the cliff at Cisco, the product market fit did not change from when we
Hmm.
started this to when we got to the top of the MQ. It started
Okay.
with that. It started with that theory that, hey, there's an architectural change happening in networking around cloud and AI. The theory was
Mm-hmm.
that, cloud is a much better way of maintaining and developing software.
Mm-hmm.
Is that theory
Okay.
true? I think most of us would say yes, that theory is true. If you've been in the software business, compared to
Yeah.
putting software on a box, guys,
Yeah.
writing software in the cloud is a lot easier and better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be honest, the AI theory was back in 2014. That was still kind of, yeah, I don't know if that's true or not. Now it's turning out to be a lot more truer than, people are starting to realize that, yes, all this fancy math does make a difference. These deep learning networks are actually are actually different. I mean, when you look what's happening right now, so yes, they do make a big difference. They make a big difference in cars and medicine and in networking. They're starting to make a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask this question. I mean, I'm very curious to ask this. It's on the lines where you mentioned that it's around having the PMF again. So I want to ask this question. You talked about being delusional at times where people do not know if they have a PMF, but they try to build it. I mean, being delusional is a point where somebody doesn't know if they are looking the right direction. And typically, if somebody's aiming very big, that could happen a lot of times. How do you think one could avoid that, being not delusional when they're building in the deep tech space?
Yeah, it's hard. Like when you start, as I'm saying, when you start in the beginning, that product market fit is hard. If you look at Zoom, I
Yep.
mean, if someone told you, hey, we're going to go build a bigger, better WebEx, you would have told them you're crazy, guys.
Yeah.
that's a tough market. There's already a lot of players in collaboration. Uh,
Yeah.
but someone at Zoom knew a little bit about that market, right? They knew a
Right.
little bit because they'd been in the market and they understood there was a crack in the market and an opportunity to disrupt it. Um, Same with Elon Musk and electric cars, right? If someone told you
Yeah.
if someone told you they're going to start a new car business, you would have told them they're crazy, guys. No one's, that hasn't worked for, but somehow Elon made it work, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I get down to execution. Even though you may have the right product market fit, it's not like Elon was the first one to try to build an electric car. He just happened to be the first one who actually figured out how to find that path to success, right?
Yep.
You know, he
Yep.
knew he knew. It's like when we started Mist, right? I had plenty of people tell me, Bob, that the market does not need another wireless company, right? They don't need another. But I could kind of see the path to, hey guys, there is a space. There's an architectural change that's happening here, and it's not so much about wireless; it's more about cloud AI.
So yeah, and in fact, on today's date, Mist AI is like a kind of a, I mean, somewhat for someone in a segment, for many people, it's like kind of a must-have thing. I mean, if you can't imagine having wireless networks running without the help of AI, I believe, on today's date. I think it's interesting. I want to ask this question because you have mentioned about jumping off the cliff. I think we talked about Zoom doing that. You talked about, and I think. They might be your ex-colleagues from Cisco, I don't know. But I remember, they built it really big. And same is with the case of Mist AI. I want to ask this question, as someone now that you have done it multiple times, when do you think is the best time to jump off the cliff and, just start building stuff? Because, how do you take that call? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I tell usually when I talk to people who are just getting started or something, I would say at a very high level, if you want to go down the startup path, you want to keep yourself out of debt, because if you want to jump off the cliff, I usually tell people give yourself at least 9 months to raise money. You have to be able to survive 9 months without a paycheck if you want to basically go out and try to raise money. So I think that's the first step of jumping off the cliff. Do you just have the means of doing it?
Okay.
The second thing, I've seen people jump off the cliff where they try to spend their own money. And usually I tell them, it's like, you're better off to try to raise money. Because if you can't raise money, that means there's something wrong with the theory.
Right.
If you can't, because there's enough people out there. If you have a reasonable business, if you have a reasonable product market fit in a business, and you have to have the team. I've seen a lot of problems where someone has the right vision, but they don't have the right team. Because investors are looking for a team that they believe can execute on the vision. They may buy your visions, they may believe the vision market fit, but they may not trust the team you have to do it. And when I say team, it's usually both technical and go to market. Because a lot of people who start companies are on the technical side, which is usually the key. You got to have a strong technical product. That product that you have to have something to actually start. But you also have to have a go to market, right?
Yeah.
Now you can raise money on a technical team and then come back in and try to fill in the marketing team, sales marketing team leader. But that's the other piece of the puzzle. You got to basically make sure that you have a go-to-market story that makes sense. How are you going to sell it? Because most companies don't fail because the engineer team didn't build the product. Usually they get in trouble when they find out how much it costs to actually sell and market what they built.
Yeah, that's a very fine perspective. And I mean, there are a lot of people who also bootstrap, right? So how would they go about it? I mean, for them, that would typically fall in the first bucket where you mentioned about having a 9 months bucket, a 9 months runway. Is that how you would put it for someone who doesn't want to, let's say, raise funds?
Well, I mean, I'd say that, you see a couple different people like Robert, like Ubiquity is a famous story, right? Ubiquity, for those in the wireless space, Ubiquity is Robert Pera. He bootstrapped that whole company. He did not raise any money, right? He got that whole company bootstrapped up and everything. It took him a while to do it, but he built it from scratch.
Yep.
And that's a fine path, right? If you have the wherewithal to actually bootstrap yourself up and actually get, kind of fund your way through the process, if you can make that happen.
Yeah. Okay. And if somebody's looking to bootstrap, so I mean, when do they jump off the cliff? I mean, if I relate that to your previous question.
I would say a customer, if you're bootstrapping, you got to have a paying customer right up front.
Yeah. Okay.
This is what I call anchor customers. If you're going to jump off the cliff, you tend to want to have an anchor, one or two anchor customers who share your vision, and are willing to basically pre-invest with you, right? They're like, yes, we share your vision. We'll pre-invest, we'll buy up front, and trust you to deliver. So that's usually probably another criteria if you want to jump off the cliff. Do you have like an anchor customer who shares your vision, and is willing to join you on the adventure? Even at Mist, we had some anchor customers. We had some customers who shared our vision, and helped shape the product with us, early in the very early days.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very valuable input. And I just want to pick one question that Vineet has asked on the chat, and it's around hiring. But are there any recommendations for hiring practices? I mean, any recommendations around? I think let me decipher this. I think it's around connecting with the data science community. How can someone who's a talent leader connect better with the data science community? Because you're someone who's pretty much a leader and has built businesses. So
Oops, did I lose you? Nope, I think we got disconnected.
yes, I got disconnected. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So I think on the attracting, I says, the attraction, success, kind of leads to success, right? It's a little bit different. Attracting talent now, now that we're a leader in the Gartner MQ, it's a little bit easier to attract talent to the vision. But I think, whether it's, in the early days or now, it starts with, a vision that people can resonate with, whether it's whether it's your customer or the employee that you're trying to attract. People like to be part of community. I think in general, as I'm saying, I think data scientists enjoy community, right? I think data scientists enjoy being part of a community, where they can learn from others around them, right? So I think that's part of the attraction. You got to build kind of a vision that, that resonates with them. And you also have to build you have to build a team, right? You have to build a community around which they feel comfortable joining. So that's usually, I would say, what I've learned at Mist was you got to build kind of a positive energy team vision.
Okay. It's okay. I think that also aligns with what you mentioned earlier about having more of believers and people with the right attitude. As we're inching towards the end of the session, I want to quickly pick this question by Thai. How? I mean, if somebody's, would you recommend having in MLOps inside? It's around data science again, but yeah, I want to ask this question to you. Would you recommend someone to have an in-house team for building MLOps or running MLOps side of things, or you would want it to, you would recommend someone to, have a third party for it? What's your recommendation?
Well, I'm a big fan of in-house. When you say out of house, I think of things like Databricks, right? How much should you put in-house, and what, if you're looking like, because there's a lot of little startups here I've seen out there, like they're specializing in time series anomaly detection, right? They're building a whole service around trying to generalize solving that problem. So would I go outside and say, hey, I'm gonna put all my time series anomaly detection, outsource it, to this third party service? If it's not critical to the business, I would say yes. If it's critical to the business, I would probably say no. If it's core to my differentiation product, there's a lot of little startups right now trying to solve the customer support problem, right? Knowledge base. When you basically type in questions, they're trying to figure out, how to, from the NLP problem, right? I could outsource that. If that's in my customer support piece, I may not need to have that in-house. I could be an out-of-house. So there are examples of things that can be done out-of-house, but anything that's really critical to your IP, I think needs to be in-house.
Yep, I think that's a pretty straightforward recommendation. Okay, so I think we're almost towards the end of the session. I want to thank you, Bob, for being with us today. And I think it has been a wonderful discussion. I was kind of a bit random in picking questions, but the community was pretty active in putting it across. I'm sure they'll love the discussion. There are still questions coming in, but yeah, I think we'd rather wrap this up. Thanks a ton, Bob, for being with us today. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
always a pleasure, Mudit. This is always something, like I said, easy, always fun to chat about AI startups. That's always a topic dear to my heart.
I'm glad, Bob, you have this vision around, you share the passion for educating people around it. Thank you so much, Bob.
Yep.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.